Let me first introduce Joseph Haggerty. He's going to be talking about title, WFG Title Company. Maria Howard from First American, HD. Our lender is John Dang, Wells Fargo. Insurance is Mark Wu, Allstate. Escrow is Vanessa James, Viva Escrow.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Okay, so I'm going to go first. This is the first of this time we've done any kind of panel like this, and we're going basically in order, from what you should consider from the beginning. So with title, from two different perspectives, the listing side or selling side or the buyer side. From the listing side, you want to talk to your title company or whoever you like to talk to, and basically they can tell you what's affecting the property ahead of time, or you can order a prelim from them to find out what's going on ahead of time. That's up to you though, because obviously, a prelim could not be the one that's used in the transaction based on your contracts that you have. If someone's going to choose a different company from the contracts, but basically you can also just review those items ahead of time without getting a prelim, and what you want to know is, who is on title and how are they holding title, and how many deeds have recorded since the last time there was a full transfer or insurance, because any title company is going to want to verify all of those. So if you have a property that's in a trust, you're going to want to possibly ask your client for a trust ahead of time, a copy of their trust, to review what other people might have interest in that property or might have to sign for that property. Also with your contracts, you're going to want to make sure that all of the parties are involved in signing all those pages from the selling side. You're also going to want to look at what taxes are owed and what liens are affecting the property. You can't verify exactly what judgments or liens might show up during the transaction, but you can get a rough idea so that you can also give your seller an estimated net proceed before putting it on the market or once it's on the market, so you can look into those things. You might also want to see what else could be affecting the value of the property. So if there are any easements that show up on the prelim, sometimes that can affect the buyer's decisions. If there's any very large taxes, if the property's in a new community or anything, most things out in the Inland Empire, Orange County, have a lot of district taxes that are very expensive and make buyers cautious. You could see things from anywhere from like $2,000 to $4,000 of district taxes on top of the annual property taxes. Those are some of the basic things from the listing side that you can look into. Also, if you can't find any comps on a property, title companies can help to look into the other homes in that neighborhood that might, if you have a new property, for example, you're not going to just find comps online with your online programs. So what we could do is look into the transfer values of recent sales in that community. From the buyer's perspective, at this point, you should already have a prelim if you have a buyer coming in, right? Or one is on the way. So at this point, the buyer is going to be concerned with things that could delay the transaction. So if there's any, really old loans that weren't able to get a demand for, or that's just a basic one. Also, if the property has easements, you might want to see plotted easements, so you can see where the easements lie on the property. And some lots may have 23,000 square feet, but only 8,000 of that is usable, and so people want to see exactly where those easements lie. If there was any recent construction on the property, if someone just remodeled the property and added a lot of stuff, title companies are going to look into the contractors, and they're going to ask for paperwork showing that all the contractors and subcontractors were paid, to verify that, because the mechanics lien could come up after the transaction. So be aware that that's something. If a property was demoed, they're going to look into that. Anything that was done to the property. So I'm going to go into and just talk about the fees and the difference in the policies really briefly. So all title companies, as you know, are regulated to charge certain fees. the actual fee for the premium of the insurance is stated in the state records for each company, and so that's the price that we have to stick with. If there's any kind of discount that was allowed, those discounts are also in public records for the state to approve, and those are the only things that are allowed for a title company to work with as far as the premiums. The other fees that come with it are sub-escrow, wire fee, and now another one that they've made mandatory is the recording service fee. The reason all of these fees have to be charged is because they're hard fees where the title company incurs a cost. And if we did not charge those fees, that would be considered a kickback. So, you're always going to see those fees. Anything more than that could be considered something like a junk fee or something that you could question, was that really needed or was that used? But, so those are the the fees that were regulated by the policies. The two different policies that you get as a owner, there's the basic one, which is called the CLTA, or sometimes it's just called the basic rate policy. That one only covers records that are, recorded items. So on record, anything on record is covered by the basic policy. But when you pay for the extended policy or the ALTA policy, which is almost always recommended in a sale transaction, you're covering off-record matters. So you're covering things that weren't shown, if there was some encroachment by the neighboring property, if that mechanic's lien popped up later, or anything popped up between the time that you closed your transaction that did not show on the last preliminary report from the title company. All that stuff will be covered and you'll be protected. So that's just it's usually an additional 10% more. It should be the same across the board for most companies. So I'm gonna pass it on to Maria.
Welcome, everybody. Hi. Well, of course, natural hazard. Joe mentioned that they're regulated. Everybody up here is regulated, except for me. I'm the only person in your transaction that is not regulated by the state of California. We have no barrier to entry. Anybody can start an NHD company, et cetera, et cetera. And that's really important to know. Because of that, you want to make sure that you're picking a company that's reputable, integrity, has technology, and is leading in this industry to bring you the best information. Now, I'm super excited because we just celebrated our 40-year anniversary. August 15th was our 40th year mark for us being in business. So we're kind of like the pioneer of the natural hazard world. I want to talk about timelines. Most of you order your NHD typically when you enter into escrow, right? Pretty much. That's the typical. I'm going to kind of hopefully open your mind to another timeline that's more beneficial for your transaction. What happens is we generally feel that best practices to order an NHD is at listing. And you're going to say, well, why? Well, the reason being is because sometimes there are zones regarding like a flood, liquefaction, high fire severity zones, all these things that may require your buyer to procure additional types of insurance, which Mark will get into as well as when it's his turn. These can be very costly to your buyer, especially on the flood zones. I know it sounds funny to talk about flood in a dry spell. We're all going, well, what happened to the water? But it doesn't change the zonings. They're still there, and your lender will typically ask for that, especially on the zones for A and V, and when they're securing, of course, a loan. So when that happens, if your buyer is really tight entering into a transaction and the ratio, all that's computed in his debt ratio. The flood, Melrose, the 19 Bond Act, their taxes, everything is in that. So if they have to get flood and they're right there and that flood insurance can cost between $4,000 and $6,000 a year, guess what? Your transaction may go south. We had a situation recently down in OC where our rep actually had a transaction where they were ready for docs, and the lender said, Mr. Buyer, you need flood insurance. And the buyer said, oh no, I'm not going to go forward. I'm not buying flood insurance. This is too much. I'm not going to do it. I'm going to cancel the transaction. Well, you can imagine spending weeks' time invested in this, and your buyer, 1 second, wants to walk. Well, what happened is that the NHD report they had received had said, from us, you weren't in one. The lender says you are. So now they come back to us, we look at our maps, and we pull everything, and we provide the buyer with the flood certification, which allows the buyer not to obtain additional flood insurance. Because sometimes, even though the parcel is zoned or touching FEMA flood, that doesn't mean the structure is actually in the flood plain. The structure could be in another part of the parcel of land. So we were able to help that buyer, and they took the contingency off the table, not requiring additional flood insurance. So everybody was happy, and they closed. Now, everybody knows we report on 3 different levels: state, county, and city. Why is that important to you? Now you're representing a buyer. Well, again, I still recommend that you get the NHD report, even if you're showing properties to your buyer. Why? Because if your buyer is planning to buy a home and turns that into his dream house, and he says, I'm going to want to do a deck, I want to do a pool, I want to knock this wall, I want to add here, and he wants to do all types of renovations. And then he goes down to the city. Where's he going to pull permits, right? The city. And the city turns around and says, guess what, Mr. Buyer? You can't pull that deck out, and you cannot pull that pool because you may be in a liquefaction, you may be near a fault zone, you may be near a transmission pipeline. So again, and who are the clients going to generally be upset with? You guys. Because they're going to say, well, why didn't you tell me? You're the expert. I'm coming to you to help me make the best choice. So I strongly encourage you, wherever you're farming, the package you're getting, please learn your demographics. Every city has different determinations. They vary from the state. Believe it or not, they do. The data that you're getting on that NHD report is super important. We use the safety element from the general plan. I'm not saying that other NHD companies, their data is incorrect, but it's not as broad as the one that we use because we use the ones that the cities use. And the reason being is because we want to make sure that we're giving you the most current updated information for your buyer. And that safety element, for example, I had on the website for the city of Arcadia, they have their 40-page document printed there, which you can actually download and keep. Most of your cities, if you go down to their city planning and ask them for this document, they pretty much will give it to you. And it's really important to have because it will tell you what are the things that are going on. City of Arcadia actually has a paragraph in their general plan saying that prior to entering into a transaction, you must inform the buyer of any of the special study zones. How are you going to do that if you don't get the NHD report up front? You typically can't. So I really and strongly encourage you to do it at listing. Again, it's no cost to you. There's no upfront fees. We are billed through escrow. If you don't get paid, guess what? We don't get paid. In addition to that, if you're representing a buyer and you're showing him properties and he's letting you know what he wants to do with that property, strongly suggest to him, Mr. Buyer, please go down to the city and find out from the planning department if what you want to do, convert your house purchase into your dream home, that you can help him fulfill that dream. I work pretty closely with everybody. If you have questions, your buyers can call me. Your sellers can call me, you can call me. If I don't have the answer, I can pretty much elevate that question to our GIS team. We have a certified geologist on staff, and we have 100% support from our company. I have to say First American has the best NHD report out there. Sorry. But again, be sure that you're working with vendors that are reliable. They help you. They help your transaction go close successfully, and that's what we're here to do. So that's pretty much for me. I have a lot of things to talk about. NHD has tons of layers, but again, you have to we don't have enough time to go all over that. But if you want to sit with me on a one-on-one, I'd be happy to talk with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Good morning, everyone. So when escrow opens, what's next, right? So typically, we would ask your clients, first and foremost, to get pre-approved. So what happens during this pre-approval? We would ask for some documentations on their income, their assets, permission to run their credit, and from there, be able to do a pre-approval for your client. And sometimes it's not about how much they can be approved for, but sometimes it's about how much they're comfortable in making that monthly payment. Because evidently it's really about your client, right? And how they will feel at the end of the day after they purchase that home. So once we open escrow, what does that really mean? That's really an agreement, right? With seller and buyer agreeing on a price. And once the contract's all agreed, then we so-called open escrow. We'll work with escrow, Vanessa, and I would contact Vanessa and say, hey, I'm the lender for this client. When available, send over your lender's package to me, right? And I would also work with title to get the prelim, and I would contact the client to let them know, hey, congratulations, this is what's gonna happen, this is the timeline, this is how long it's gonna take, and we're gonna be working closely with escrow and title, and we're gonna order appraisal today. And from there, that's typically what happens when we open escrow. And process takes typically about 30 days or so, depending on what kind of transaction we're dealing with and what kind of property we're dealing with. So on the listing side, pretty much the lender don't really come in play on the listing side. Probably just get your clients pre-approved if they are selling and then buying another property. So that's pretty much it. Okay. Mark?
Well, actually, I'm going to let ladies first, so.
Hi, everyone. Okay, so once your offer on your home or another property is accepted, you place it into escrow. And what does this mean? It's a term that describes a neutral third party handling of funds or documents in exchange for, or handling funds in exchange for a document. We need to follow instructions. And your car contract, really, it's a purchase agreement and joint escrow instructions. So I want to really emphasize utilize it, because not all escrow companies will draw up their own escrow instructions. They're actually an addendum to the contract, and they include the company's general provisions. We don't actually have to use them. We use them because we want to specify what we will take on, what we'll do, what we won't do for our company. But I know some escrow companies that don't even use it. We're not required to use it. So you want to make sure that your contract is complete. You want to make sure that the contract, all the boxes are checked, everything that you want is on there. There's some that have forgotten to mark the box of who's paying for what, who's paying for HOA docs, who's paying for title. Then what happens? The seller can say, well, buyer, you didn't mark the box. You got to pay for it if you want it. So be careful. One of the things in the contract by default is the deposit of funds. By default, it goes to wire now. If you don't mark the box, you can't just bring in a personal check or a cashier's check, because what if those funds don't clear? You know, it takes a little longer for a deposit of a check to clear. Wire is a little bit more like within a day or so it clears. So if you don't bring in that check, it could be, the wire, and you bring in a check, it could be considered out of contract. If you don't put the date of acceptance, you know, how does escrow know what, you know, how does anyone know when those contingencies date end? So please complete your contract in full. Coordinate with escrow. One of the things Joe and Maria mentioned were about getting title policy or title preliminary report of title looked at ahead of time, the natural hazard looked at ahead of time. Another thing is the homeowners association. check with your sellers of who is the management company, who's a HOA company. Utilize, again, your car contract. There's a HOA form, HOA 2 form, HOA 1 form. If you don't know what documents are required by law, it's section 4525, and it's on your HOA 2 form. It lists what documents are needed. It's really seller's responsibility to get these documents to the buyer. It's not escrow's responsibility. It's the seller's, and you're representing the seller. So you want to think about it ahead of time, prepare them, find out how much the cost is. Sometimes they're surprised at how much they have to pay up front. Sometimes, too, the seller can go to their HOA management and ask for a copy of the most recent, and they won't get charged, or they'll get charged less. I believe you're required within, on the contract, I believe it says within 3 days, you need to put in a request to the HOA. And again, if contingencies need to be checked off by a certain time, you need to get those documents to the buyer for review before a certain time. So utilize it, order it ahead of time. Same thing with the statement of information. I believe it says it needs to be done in the beginning. So encourage you to have that filled out right at the listing. Then title can look into and see what liens might pop up. I got one on a refinance that was turned in with the loan documents, and they pulled a lien. And the buyer already signed the note, and the 3-day rescission was right about over. The lender wanted to fund. I told him, I'm not ready. I'm going to have to reject your wire. Don't send it. I'm not ready. They funded. That means that if I record the deed, that lien would be in first position. That $3,000 lien would be in first position over the $400,000 loan. I don't think any lender wants that. And if I'm not able to close and pay off everything, then the existing loan would still stay, and they would be paying interest on 2 loans. So please turn in the SI ahead of time. So SI, HOA information, and there's one other thing. And then, excuse me? I'm not sure I understand. And insurance. How can I forget that? Have your clients shop around for insurance. The lenders will be asking escrow for an estimate of fees. They need to disclose within a certain time frame, right from the beginning. That with this closing disclosure going on, we need to know, especially if there's impounds, we need to know, we need to get quotes. Usually escrow will order it a little down the road, but we need to know how much it is. So shop around, ask for quotes. They might have to do an inspection. And Mark will talk a little bit more about insurance, but we will typically order it a little bit later in the transaction, but nowadays with the CD, the lenders have been ordering it. And so some don't see it till the end. And then if the buyer hasn't even shopped around, we don't know. Last minute, everybody's scrambling. So be sure to prepare ahead of time. Mark?
Thank you. Vanessa said an important thing. How did I forget about insurance? Well, oftentimes, unfortunately, we are the forgotten child in the whole escrow process. There's a presumption that, hey, if a client has insurance with XYZ company and they're buying another house, they'll automatically get the policy. And so even my own clients wait till the day of closing of the escrow and say, by the way, I bought this house. And it takes time to react. And so I wanted to provide you guys, because many of you probably have not even seen what evidence of insurance looks like. And if you looked at the pamphlet that I had David, my trusted assistant, I don't know where he is, that handed out, you'll see one for homeowners and you'll see one for a condo. So that, because this is the documentation that a lender will require before the final piece for their part, because they want to make sure that they are insuring their interests and before they will fund the loan. And then Vanessa, as an escrow officer, right, this is the final documents before she closes everything, and then the policy closes. So oftentimes in the past, like she said, it's sometimes we're finding out the day of escrow closing, and then it's like, can you do the insurance? So what I always instruct my realtor friends and whatnot is make sure you're having that conversation with your buyers to start shopping, to go back to their companies if they have one, or go back to anybody that you deal with that you know is an expert in this field and that is well versed in the insurance escrow transaction pertaining to insurance. But know that when things happen, there are insurability issues. Even breeds of dogs can be a problem. You know, if your clients own a certain breeds of dogs, they might not realize there's many companies out there that won't insure the home. Or if the house that they're purchasing has claims, they might not be able to get a preferred policy. Or if the buyer themselves have claims, they may have issues getting insurability. So those are items. And then lately you've seen the brush fires that have been happening all across Southern California and Northern California. Sometimes we may be telling a client of yours, hey, we can insure the home, a brush fire comes, and then our binding authorities are revoked for a little bit until the insurance companies can assess what kind of damage and what's happening before they will say, all right, you can release binding the policy. So things like that often also happen. Then we have issues like if you're involved with a certain type of policies. You know, there are policies that we can COD. Most companies are like that, where we can do the homeowners, the condo policies, the landlord policies. We can COD them. But sometimes on commercial policy, I had a realtor, hopefully she's not watching this, argue with me for a while that, hey, you know, this has to come out of escrow. And we said, no, it's a commercial policy. The companies that we have, they need funds before we can bind. And so it might just be a deposit, but we need something in place so that we can provide that evidence. And then they said, well, then we'll have to go someplace else. Well, then that person came back around and utilized us again because of the fact that they found that it's pretty prevalent in the industry. So that can be an issue. You know, Maria talked about flood zones and all that. Flood insurance is another thing that money has to be before escrow, whereas the homeowner does not have to. Then the other part of the transaction is if you might get a disclosure form saying high fire hazard area, and I tell my realtors all the time when I'm doing my training classes, just because it says high fire area doesn't mean that your clients might have a tough time getting insurance, or they may have to get pay a premium for that, because it really depends, and every company has different underwriting requirements, but it really depends on how far they are from the brush area. So you might have two houses in the same block, but one's 1,000 feet away, and we may be able to put a preferred policy on that, whereas the house right against the hillside, we're not going to be able to do that. The one thing is there's always a policy an agent can get, which is the fallback plan, which is a California FAIR plan. So in order to close escrow, you need insurance, and that can always be provided. My last thing is sometimes insurance isn't required, and that's when you have an all-cash offer, But I, again, always instruct all my realtor friends is that you have to always advise your client to get it, even though it's not required, because there's no lender involved, because liability issues can be a key. And if you have told your clients, hey, don't worry about it, we'll get it later, and something happens that day, or maybe somebody got injured after they closed escrow, they're going to have several $100,000 lawsuit, and guess who? They're going to come finding you. Anyways, thanks.
Thank you, everybody. Let's give a hand to the panel. We're going to open it up for questions at this time. Does anybody have any questions?
Did you say if there was a fire in the home? So if she's asking if there was a fire in the home, I'm guessing you're asking if the house was burned down and then rebuilt, or if there was any kind of fire damage, would that show on title? No, we would don't. That kind of thing would, it could cause something that's within city records, which is most of the time considered off record with title. It's not something that's usually recorded. But if for some reason the property was deemed uninhabitable because of that kind of damage, then there would be something recorded in respect to a notice of substandard, occupancy. So.
I like you can if you're representing a buyer and you're concerned if the home had any fire damage, there's a report out there called the Clue Report, and your seller is the only one that can obtain this Clue Report, and it's a claim history of the claims that the homeowner has placed on their property. It goes back 5 years, and like Mark had said, properties. Homeowners can become insurable for excessive claims. That Clue Report is really, really important for your transaction because a lot of your sellers forget and they don't fill out their TDS or SPQ forms, and they sometimes omit something, not intentionally. It does happen. And again, only the seller can order that. And it's online and it's $9.95, and no one else can get it because it's private information.
There's another option too, that if you have a long-time seller residing in the house, they can go back to their insurance agent and ask for something called a letter of experience. And that's kind of like how much claims has XY. If Vanessa was insured by me and for the last 5 years, we would present a report here, Vanessa, these are the claims you have filed since the inception of the policy. So that would show you also what claims. Letter of experience, all right?
Somebody.
Julia, this is for Mark. Mark, in regards to the insurance here, somebody had house burned down, first claim, but it was a major one. Now they rebuilt the house, paid by insurance. Now the person decides to sell the house. So now how's that going to affect the borrower coming in when there's a major claim into that house?
Again, every company has different underwriting requirements, and you will always find a company that has a tolerance for that. So as far as the buyer coming in, a lot of companies don't worry about what's happened on the house itself. And so if she's buying that house, let's say it was your house that burned down, and now you built it up and you're selling it, all right? Some companies would have problems in insuring that house. Some companies would. So you can always find insurance, is what I'm saying. But the problem is you've got to make sure that whoever your buyers are interacting with, whatever companies they are interacting with, that they have already made that known so that the agent can properly advise that, saying, hey, this is something I can't do, or that, yeah, that's not a problem. So does that answer the question?
And I just want to say, please insurance, even if there's not a lender. I had a coworker, and I'm not sure the complete outcome, but I had a coworker a few years back, and they didn't want it. They're like, we'll take care of it outside of escrow. Don't worry about it. We just want to close. It burned the day of recording. It burned down. Please get insurance.
Wow.
And I tried to offer that coworker insurance.
I just want to make one quick comment. As far as when you go into escrow, and as an inspector, what I hear is if you don't have your water heater strapped and your carbon monoxide detector, you have to have the appraiser will leave and charge you to come back again. So just make sure that to help assist in your getting your inspections done and to keep the escrow moving nice and smoothly.
We forgot to add Robert to the panel.
Anything else?
I just want to say one more thing, what Vanessa said about filling out your RPA. You know, it's really important that you check on the box. You notice it's changed now. It has tax report and environmental. You need to check those because there are two different types of report, one that has environmental and one that doesn't. And in addition, if you want to get a clue, your buyer's asking for one, the other box you must put on there, seller to provide clue report. My understanding is that once you enter into escrow and et cetera, if you don't ask for it up front, it's probably going to be really difficult to get a seller to cooperate that. So maybe when you're presenting your offer, make sure that all that is checked.
And back to insurance also, you may think that because there's an HOA, the buyer doesn't need insurance, it's handled through the master insurance policy. Most lenders will ask for additional coverage, which is an HO6 policy. It's only it's a lot less, it's a few $100s is what I usually see, but the buyer will typically forget to shop around for that because they don't think they need it, but most lenders have required it.
And I'll talk on that HO6. I gave you a copy of the evidence that I would give Vanessa. But that HO6 is, like they said, in addition. And so normally the lender, I mean, the general rule of thumb right now is if there's a loan involved, we have to do 20% of the purchase price. All right, so basically, if the condo is going for $500,000, we have to put $100,000 in property. I'm sorry, the building protection, so that both the lender and the escrow will accept that. All right.
Okay, we're pressed for time right now. So let's give a final hand to our panelists.